Hi, team. Welcome to episode 3 of the Health is Wealth podcast. So, this week, what we're covering is flexible dieting. Now, this is what we preach, this is what we use within our coaching. There's quite a few reasons for it. Number one is, it's in my opinion, this is in my opinion, it's a more sustainable approach to use. And what we're going to go through here is like what it is, why it is the most sustainable approach to use long term, why, as we say within evidence-based coaching, it's the last coaching program you will ever need, because you can carry this on doing it forever without even thinking about it as such, and most importantly, how we put it into practice and the benefits, if that makes sense, guys. So what is flexible dieting? I think what I'll do is I'm going to ask for other people how they view it, how they look at it, because there's another term for flexible dieting that we also use, and it's called if it fits your macros, meaning you can eat a variety of different foods as long as it aligns within your macros stroke calories. But we can't rule out that calories are the most important thing. It's calories that matter, calories and protein that really matter. So I'll start with John. John, what view do you have? What's your view on flexible dieting? How do you look at it? And how have you found it over the last 2-3 years, John?
Yeah, so I have a different perspective on it now than when I first started in the program. When I first started with the program, I was just kind of like trying to do baby steps, right? One thing at a time. So for me, I looked at it like I have my protein bucket, okay? And here's my protein bucket, and I know I can't exceed X amount of calories. So while I did have assignments for my carbs and fats, I was like, okay, I really can only concentrate on one thing at a time. So I'm going to fill up that protein bucket, and I'm going to make sure I stay at my calorie marker. And there were often times where if I reflected back on, some of my days as I was in my initial learning phase, I might have been programmed 60, 70, 80 grams of fat, but I may have gone severely over or under that. And that was part of, the learning journey along the way. But in the beginning, particularly in the beginning, my focus was let's fill up that protein bucket, let's hit that calorie target, and then everything fell into place after that. And then I began, adding to it as time went on. So that's my initial impression was like it was kind of like a bucket system, where I was like, let's fill this bucket first, and then we'll target everything else.
Excellent. Thanks, John. John and Greg. Greg, what's your thoughts, your views, your perspective on it?
Yeah, I would say that it's kind of similar to John. It's evolved over time. I mean, so when I first started the program, I would say that I was a lot more rigid kind of in my thinking. I think that was like kind of reflective of how I had approached this kind of stuff in the past, where, if I needed to lose weight or something like that, I was like, I'm just going to cut out like these things. I'm not going to eat them at all. For whatever period of time and so on. And, I even had, I would often tell myself that like I felt like I wasn't good at moderation. It was like I was either, I'm gonna have none, it's way easier to have none of something than like to have a little bit of it and like that kind of stuff. And, everyone's a little bit different in that regard, but I would sort of say that A, wasn't sustainable, and B, like, didn't ultimately like serve me very well. And so, from my standpoint, to Craig's point in terms of sustainability, like this has been a lot more sustainable for me in the sense of saying like, as John was pointing out, like I have this overall number of calories that I have to work with. I have, certain things that I'm optimizing for, probably most importantly is that protein category, just making sure that you have, sort of enough of that. And then, once I kind of think about that, then, like I have a lot of options, right? And if that means that I want to have, something that I enjoy, but maybe isn't like the healthiest thing ever, or something like that, like that's okay, kind of occasionally. I'm sure we'll talk about this more as we go on. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's like licensed to just eat a bunch of junk all the time and that kind of stuff, right? Like you're still trying to like fuel your body and like be nutritious and like be healthy and so on. So there's other considerations there, but when I first started working with Craig, like I remember asking him like, so where's the meal plan? Like what exactly am I supposed to be eating here and like things like that. And he was like, there is no meal plan. Like, it was like kind of um, a little bit surprising to me, but like as I kind of like saw the light of, kind of what he was getting at, like then it kind of clicked for me and I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this makes sense. Like it's more on me to figure out like what foods work for me, like what's going to work, what can I like maintain over a long period of time, as opposed to Craig or Gary, saying, on Monday eat this and on Tuesday eat that and whatever. And then, 5 weeks into it, I get sick of all of those foods, or something like that. So that's been kind of my experience so far with it.
Excellent. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Greg. And yeah, like something you mentioned there, Greg, which was great about the like not letting it take over as in a free-for-all. We don't want to be consuming majority of our calories from things like chocolate, chips, because as we know, and how we look at it at evidence-based coaching is we call it the 80-20 rule. 80% of them foods to come from unprocessed quality foods. 20% is things like your date nights with your partners, your social events. And of course, many of you in this group, in this program, are traveling. Round about 60% of our clients are traveling. So the thing is, giving people a meal plan is all fine. And, it is a meal plan. Meal plans do work to a degree, but they're not sustainable long term, And when people ask me for a meal plan, we give example meal plans. We give people like sample meal plans as an example, but we want them to be a bit more adventurous. We want them to still be able to eat the foods they enjoy, have a variety of different foods, and because if you don't, it's going to get boring. You're going to start feeling like you're on a diet, and when you feel like you're on a diet, this is when basically setting yourself up for failure before you even start to a degree. So one of the biggest reason for using this approach with our clients, working with you guys, executives, business owners, is to give you a meal plan. We'd be doing you a disservice because we know you wouldn't stick to it. Now, I know there is some clients that do have meal plans who are sticking to it fine, Monday to Friday. We leave the weekends for a bit more flexibility, to be able to enjoy, a bit of social time and things. So, Gary, what's your take on it? Let's give us because I believe you practice it yourself as well, Gary. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, that's correct. So I think something that I didn't necessarily see when I first started doing it was it creates this education purposes that a meal plan would not be serve the purpose, where with regards to tracking nutrition, and especially not just tracking the food, but accurately tracking the foods in regard to weighing it out, that will give you an education beyond you can ever think. And then going forward, then you will be able to take that with you for the rest of your life. So when you get to a point where you're happy it will serve on two bases, that you will be getting results while eating the food you enjoy, and that relationship with food will actually be better, because just people still demonizing certain food groups and cutting food groups out in order to get a result. And as a result, they're spinning their wheels, because it's a vicious yo-yo cycle where they cut it out, they crave it, they binge, and then they beat themselves up and tell themselves it's all their fault, when in fact it was actually the plan itself that just didn't adapt to their lifestyle. So with majority of the guys we work with at ABC, as what they're traveling, so a meal plan would actually complicate their life rather than complement it. So this is why the approach works. So from a fat loss hierarchy, it's obviously calories in versus calories out. So I'm not sure if any of the guys heard of the Twinkie diet, where which obviously we do not recommend, but there's a guy who went on the Twinkie diet and he lost an incredible amount of weight. But so that just shows that it's calories in versus calories out. But as Craig said, we really preach the 80-20, because we don't necessarily only want people to lose weight, but we want people to feel good in the process. And there's a direct correlation between the food you're putting in your mouth and how you feel. So it's it's the quality over that as well. So I think the 80-20 is a great rule of thumb. So as Craig said, 80% whole nutritious food, and then 20% for something that you really, really enjoy, and then you can make it a part of your life that you can still include and also get results.
Yeah, and something you mentioned there, that Twinkie diet was crazy. That guy who done it, all he ate was Twinkies, wasn't it, for something like 3 months, something like that, Gary, or was it a month?
Let me just pull while you're chatting, I'll pull up. I'm not sure.
I'll post it. What I'll do when I post the
everyone-
podcast, I'll post it in the. It's obviously we don't recommend you do that. This is why I mentioned we don't want you getting majority of your calories from
It was
processed
for
foods.
10 weeks, Craig. 27 pounds.
Oh, was it?
10 weeks, yeah.
Well, that's the problem with Craig with GLP-1s, right? Like GLP-1s, it doesn't teach anything. It just tells you that, or it just triggers or elicits, or holds back your hunger. So when you're, without proper training and education, you're just literally, you could just be eating the same exact junk, and just reducing the amount. Like you just said, Gary, I can eat a precise amount of Twinkies or Big Macs or whatever that satisfy my calorie intake, but that doesn't, and I will lose weight doing that, right? but I'm gonna also feel like crap. I'm not gonna have any performance whatsoever, and anyway.
Yeah, and things like the GLP-1s, Ozempic, Wegovy, and all of these. I've got nothing against them. Me personally, I don't have nothing against them, and I think certain people do. Well, they are made for people with diabetes, and so that's what the purpose was. But then, obviously, it cottoned on to people who are overweight in general. But they do serve a purpose. But it's not getting to the root cause of the problem. So all that these do is the decrease your appetite. So a lot of people, like I was talking to a guy at the gym who's been doing it. He's 2 weeks in, and he's feels absolutely dreadful on it. He's constantly feeling sick. He doesn't want to eat. He said it's totally, how do I put it? Like it's spoiled the way he looks at food, how he can't enjoy a meal, he can't go out for a meal because he doesn't want to eat, he can't drink alcohol now because he was vomiting, and it's these side effects far outweigh the positive too. But again, like I say, I've got nothing against these, but my opinion, we need to get to the root cause of the problem, because all they're doing is when you're eating very few calories, all that happens then is your metabolism is down-regulating, which makes it harder long term. And plus, again, like anything, like keto, like whatever, majority of diets, as soon as you stop, 95% of the people gain all the way back on again. Where using a flexible approach with your nutrition, no foods are off limits. You know, and I obviously check in and speaking to clients every week who are having things like pizza on a weekend. And the only difference what they're doing, they're just having a little bit less, that they're tracking it. You know, they're accounting for it. Because if it's measured, it's managed. And I know weighing food can sound a bit daunting, it can sound a bit fat, like it takes time and things, but these are habits that we want our clients to get into that's going to yield the more sustainable results. And for like, I know people will guesstimate food portions and things like that. That's all fine and dandy, but even me, after tracking food for my nutrition for the last 25 years, I still don't get it spot on. You know, but the sustainability side of flexible dieting is we've got more freedom, we've got more flexibility, the less restrictive. And ultimately, what we've got to look at the long-term adherence, because the last thing we want for our clients is for them to gain the weight back on when they leave the program. But if they continue the journey themselves, there's no reason why they should ever gain the weight back on. Like 20 years ago, 22 years ago now, when I lost all my weight, I've not gained any of it back on because I've carried it on. And don't get me wrong, there is times when I've been competing, when I've like done photo shoots that I have used a meal plan. But that's for 12, 14, 16 weeks, something like that. There's no way I could do it for any longer than that because it's just far, you know, there's no flexibility there whatsoever as such.
Yeah, if I could just jump in for a second. Oh, go ahead, Craig, sorry.
No, go on, I'd love you
I was
to,
just going
Greg.
to say, I mean, like, I do think that the psychology part of this ends up being pretty important, or the sort of mental side of this. And, you know, Gary kind of, you know, touched on this a little bit. I think Craig was getting at this a bit as well. But, you know, at least for me, one of the things that I found to be important with respect to, you know, flexible dieting and that sort of a thing is that, you know, a few things, right? One is this idea of, hey, I can have whatever, or if I'm going out socially or that kind of a thing. And to the extent that I'm not staying within my calories, or there's, you know, something else going on, like it's often helpful for me to reflect on, well, what's actually the root cause, or what's actually the underlying driver, right? And like sometimes for me, if I'm not getting enough sleep, you know, for example, then, you know, I'll maybe tend to want like something a bit sugary or whatever as a bit more of a pick me up, you know, kind of a thing, right? But the root cause there on maybe going over my calories or something like that has more to do with the fact that I'm not getting enough sleep, you know, as an example, or maybe I'm in a stressful situation at work, and so then, you know, or there's something else going on in my life, and so then I like, you know, stress eat, or I'm like, you know, using that as a way to, you know, sort of self-medicate, if you will, like a little bit, you know, that kind of thing. And so one of the other things that I've found to be important just as I've kind of gone through this journey is to just try to raise my awareness around some of those things, to sort of say, hey, in these situations where I'm eating stuff, or I'm maybe going outside of, you know, where I think I should otherwise be in a given day, like what's the driver, you know, for that? Is it, you know, is there something else going on in my life that I actually need to address? And it's like, it's just showing up in the form of, you know, eating more. But what I really need to do is I either need to focus more on my sleep, maybe I need to like have other strategies for dealing with stress, you know, like that kind of thing, as opposed to like the food itself actually being, you know, kind of the issue. So I feel like that's an additional, you know, kind of component here to think about.
Yeah, excellent. That was great. Thanks for sharing that, Craig. And John, so when you first started the journey using this approach, how did you put it into practice then, John? How did you find it from the beginning compared to 6 months into your transformation journey?
Yeah, so essentially, after the first 6 months, it kind of became an evaluation point of, okay, well, I've gotten this far doing this, and we still had a ways to go. I had a decent amount of weight to lose. So a lot of it was, okay, well, let's try in the beginning calories and protein, and then 6 months in, it's okay, now it's calories and protein. But if I look back on my averages, gosh, I'm really going way over on my fat intake. And so I began to kind of just adjust, like, okay, let's take a single thing. Like every day I have made a habit out of eating, this particular snack at this particular time as part of this journey so far. But maybe we can adjust that to, a piece of fruit. So for me, it was a little bit of an evolution of kind of honing in my daily practice. But then at the same time, one of the things that you had uh, prescribed to me was, kind of a free day. We had my wife and I have a particular day of the week that we like to go out and enjoy ourselves. And and I say free, but not a free day, but just a day where we had programmed, an extra X amount of calories. And we talked about that and how we would, how we could work that in, and began planning things like, what I'm going to eat when I go out, and how we're gonna have a good time, and how I'm not gonna, just be boring, right? Because it's easy to just go to a restaurant and order, a salad dry with a whole bunch of chicken breast on it, right? And you can do that all the time if you really want to, but but it's not something that's particularly sustainable. So um, being able to come to terms with the idea that my first year with the program, I still would have a glass of wine or a beer every now and then, and you know, actually programming that in without feeling ashamed of it, or being able to kind of release the idea that certain things were bad foods. It really just ended up being about moderation, and how I was going to approach that moderation in a way that made sense. If that answers the question.
Yeah, brilliant. That's great. Thanks, John. Thanks. And like Greg, when like you first started your journey, and how did you feel when you were eating out? How did you navigate that, Greg? When you were
Yeah.
eating out, and
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was like a little bit scary in the sense that, I mean, it kind of goes back to what you were talking about in terms of, uh, well, let me make a few observations. So one is that, I mean, to Gary's point, in terms of like there being an educational component to this, like I have definitely found that for myself, that in the course of trying to figure out like, well, I have this many calories to work with, I have these kinds of macros that I'm trying to work within, and so on, then it caused me to then think about like, okay, well, how do I want to do that? And so it is the case that even though I don't eat the same exact things every day in the same order, there are certain things that I eat far more often than others because I've just found that I like them, and then I kind of mix and match them in different ways on different days. And that still gives me enough variety that I feel like I'm not just being robotic about it, or I kind of can feel like, oh, okay, today I might prefer this a little bit more than that, and that sort of a thing. In terms of like eating out, I will say that sort of two things are often kind of stressful for me about that, even at this point in my journey. One is that even though you see something on the menu, you don't necessarily know in advance like what the portion size is going to be and exactly how it's prepared and all that kind of stuff. And you might look it up in MyFitnessPal, and then 7 different things, you know, come back as like maybe possible things, but the calories on them are all like fairly disparate or, you know, something like that. And so it's a little hard to know exactly what you're getting in that context. So there's that, you know, sort of component to it. And then, you know, to John's point, like, you know, and also what I was saying a minute ago, like in terms of like what are some of the other drivers on what's going on, maybe on the mental kind of psychological side, there is a certain degree of social pressure, you know, that comes into play. Like when you're out to eat, it's a social context, things like that. So it's like, even if I might otherwise want a salad and it's dry, like I know that John characterized that as boring, but let's just say that that's what I really want. You know, if my wife's ordering like some other sort of a thing and a whole bunch of other people at the table are ordering appetizers and this and that and, you know, whatever, and then you're like the one person who's like not participating in that, like, you know, that can be a little bit challenging, right? Or it could be totally fine, right? I mean, there's also, I'm not a drinker personally, like for religious reasons. And so I got into plenty of situations where like everyone else at a social thing like might be having, you know, alcohol and so on, and I'm like the one person who's not. And as time has gone on, like I'm totally fine with that. I don't even think about it as being socially awkward
Great.
anymore. It just is the way that I am, and people respect that, and it's totally cool, right? So I feel like I'm getting to the point where that's also true around food and stuff, you know, particularly in these larger, you know, kind of social type gatherings. But I think it takes a little while to kind of get there. And like I said, I think that sometimes with food, there's a bunch of other factors at play beyond just I'm hungry or I want this thing or whatever. And so the more awareness you can have around those things, then the more you can just make some conscious, intentional choices about that or develop strategies for how you want to deal with it, as opposed to trying to like figure it all out literally in the moment and so on, you know, when maybe it's going to be a little bit harder to navigate some of those things. So
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Greg. And Gary, how do you plan your day then? How do you plan, do you just plan your day a day in advance, or do you do a couple of days or a full week of,
Yeah, so something that works really, really well for me is, and you can take this strategy and plug and play into your own life, and it's sitting down and saying, okay, what would I really like to have for my first meal? And when you establish what that is, and nothing is off limits, we can reverse engineer the process. And because the adherence is the number one thing that's going to account to someone being successful or not. It's so if we establish what someone really, really wants to eat on a meal to meal basis, from there, they can just plan in advance from there, you know. So it's probably looking at a day in advance, looking at picking into tomorrow for MyFitnessPal and saying, okay, what do I really want for the first meal? And just putting that in so that it's almost like a meal plan, but you've customized it for yourself to stay on track.
Yeah, and so, something that Greg mentioned as well, like about eating out, dining out when at the beginning, and John as well, it does get a bit scary because you're feeling like, oh God, what do I order here? And like everyone's ordering burgers and pizzas and excuse me, and things with lots of sauces, but there's nothing stopping us from having that. And each week, every week without fail, I will have one meal where it is off plan to a degree. But if I go over that day, all I do, depending on how many calories I do go over, and I try not to make a habit of going over my calorie intake, but sometimes it happens, it's inevitable, it will happen. I just reduce them over the next day or over a couple of days, over a few days, depending on how far I do go over. Because, like we say, we're looking at calories over the week. This is why we like you guys to get weighed daily. Because if you're just getting weighed once a week and that day, the day before you were out for a meal or something like that, you're going to be holding more water from the sodium intake and things, probably more carbohydrates. And it's the same way if you're just tracking protein and calories. Some days when them carbohydrates are higher than others, we're going to have higher weigh-ins. And this is why we like you all to get weighed daily so we can take an average. So anything else? Anything else we can cover now? We've got 5 more minutes, 3 more minutes. Is there anything else? So also what I would like to say with the weighing side of things now, obviously when traveling, it's nearly impossible, you know, to weigh your food and get weighed yourself unless you're going to take scales with you. Me personally, when I go on vacation, holiday, I take body weight scales for this. I don't take my food scales. I'm going on vacation and enjoying myself. You know, I will eat good quality foods, high in protein. But the reason why I do take my scales with me is because when I get weighed the next day, if my weight is going up, I know that day to pull back a little bit, so it keeps me in control. You know, now I'm not saying for you guys to do that. That's entirely up to you. I personally, I'm sure, I think John does. I know a few of the other guys do take the scales because it does really help. You know, so how do you navigate it then, John? When you go on vacation, how are you able to stay on track?
Yeah, so for me, I just recognize in advance like this isn't a free for all, right? So what I'll do is, and I have, and some people don't, but I have a pretty good control over when I'm traveling, where I can stay, proximity to things that I need. So for me, and don't get me wrong, it took quite a bit more time at the beginning of my journey now than, or at that point than it does now. But when I travel, I look at my location, I kind of scout the area as far as you know, what's available for me to pick up, for me to eat out, so on and so forth. And I do whatever I possibly can to get a kitchenette, or you know, if I have to just go with a microwave and fridge at a hotel, you know, so be it. But I'm attempting to do something where I can do a little bit of preparation, and I'll also, on my travel days, I take a day bag with me where I load it up with the stuff that I'm going to try to eat while I'm either in the car or at the airport, or so on and so forth. So kind of a combination. It sounds like a lot, but when putting it into practice and doing it regularly, it really takes no time when I'm just kind of pre-programmed now to do that. I'm just kind of, because in the end, my priority is my health. So if I can look through a glass that filters out the idea that, you know, work's the most important thing in my life, if I can really honestly believe that my health is the most important thing, and then everything else falls into place, then it allows me the freedom to prepare and choose what I want to do with my week, and how I'm going to be able to record all that. So I bring food scales, I bring weight, you know, body weight scales, strategically place myself in areas where I'm able to do that. It sounds like, you know, especially with the amount that Greg travels as well, you know, I can particularly with particular attention to the exercise, you know, you scout out your areas. I'm sure you do the exact same thing with your nutrition as well. So yeah, it becomes part of your habit, part of your routine, in my opinion, once you put that into practice.
Excellent. Anyone else want to say anything, or?
Yeah, I'll jump in really quickly. Just with the strategy that I used when I was traveling in Thailand in June. So, obviously that was for leisure. So it wasn't a case where I was at conference or anything like that. But I was literally skipping breakfast for my first meal. I'd grab a protein shake from the local convenience store, some black coffee, hydrate, maybe some fruit, and then lunch, grilled chicken salad with sauce on the side. And then for dinner, I'd just probably choose whatever in reason, lean source of meat, some veg, and some carb source. And obviously, with regards to the drinks, obviously swapping the sugar drinks to a sugar calorie-free drink, or staying hydrated, and limiting alcohol. And just having that strategy in place then going into that can massively help, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And yeah, it's go on, Greg.
I was just going to say, I mean, I think, you know, a big part of what comes through in what John and Gary just said is just having a strategy and at least kind of thinking ahead a little bit. And I feel like particularly around travel, or, you know, whether they're business dinners or things like that, it's really easy to feel like there's a lot that's outside of your control. You know, it's like, well, I'm not picking the restaurant for where we're going, and you know, that kind of stuff. But you know, or maybe I can't pick when I need to travel to some place for business because other things are going on. But like recognizing that there are still a lot of variables that are within your control, right? And so, you know, within that, you know, thinking about, well, where do you want to stay, right? You know, do they have a gym or not? You know, are there, you know, depending on what might be nearby, like, you know, maybe you do bring certain foods with you just packed in your bag and that kind of stuff. So at least you have some, you know, some stuff that you're used to and you know works, and you know that kind of a thing, and has a certain nutritional profile to it. And you know, to the extent that you can focus on those variables that you do control, right? And I think as time goes on, what I've discovered is that there's actually a lot more in my control than maybe I previously realized. Then you know, then it makes it a lot easier to deal with, you know, some of those elements that are maybe a little less within your control, or at least trying to think about like, okay, well, if I have a work dinner tonight, but I still want to meet my protein, you know, target and things like that, well, that means that earlier in my day, when I do get to pick exactly what I eat, you know, here's what I'm going to do, so that, and I'm going to have this many calories and so on, so that by the time I get to that work dinner, I know that I have some flexibility around how I want to handle it and like things like that, as opposed to just doing it all on the fly, right? You know, it's like I think a little bit of planning goes a whole long way as it relates to nutrition, at least in my experience.
That's a great point, Greg. You know, and the planning just makes it so much easier, doesn't it? You know, in my opinion, just by having an idea. And yeah, you know, like I've had people where they will say, well, I don't know what my wife's going to cook for tea tonight. All we have to do is just ask them, you know, like if we can plan that, if we can plan like dinner, sorry, I'll say dinner, the tea's a UK thing, sorry. I keep forgetting. But yeah, so like just planning ahead with your food. But something I do see people when in the very early stages of the program is what they'll do, they'll eat the full food for the day and then they'll track it the next morning. We don't want to be doing that. We want to be tracking our food in advance. If we get it in, like people, lots of you guys are saying, we can't hit this protein goal. We're struggling with the protein. But if you planned your food in advance, what you're going to have for breakfast, what you're going to have for lunch, what you're going to have for dinner, what protein on each meal. And then look at them couple of snacks. Or some have got one, some have got two, depending on what your calories are, or intermittent fasting. But look at what snacks you can have that's high in protein. This is where all the information in your resources is going to help you. You know, so download them because they're there to help you. But ultimately, planning your food ahead of time, tracking our food, our calorie intake is by far the most sustainable approach, in my opinion. Long term, for adherence and to enjoy life. Because believe me, days of me competing, living off meal plans, they're not nice, they're not enjoyable whatsoever. And I know there's lots of other different, like there's other diets out there like keto, but I couldn't live without carbs myself personally, you know. But it's one of them things where using this approach that we're using at evidence-based coaching is far more sustainable. Is anyone else? John, Greg, Gary? Right.
Good.
That's a wrap. So, guys, what I'm going to do, I will post that about the Twinkie diet as well, when I find it, and also
I can maybe
if
share.
you, sorry, Gary.
I can share it to Slack for you. I've did PubMed.
Excellent, brilliant, thank you. And anything you guys want covering on the next or future podcasts, just reach out. You know, we understand you might not want to post it in the podcast channel. Just message one of us, myself, John, Gary, Greg, direct. Can you touch on this point? You know, this is why, by just covering just one or two things, keeps these shorter in time, which is more enjoyable than, listening to a long podcast. Anyway, have a great day. Thank you.